An intercepted call, a whispered confession, and Miami's most feared cartel leader about to discover that even the darkest secrets can surface when you least expect it. This is the story of how a single recording destroyed an empire built on blood and silence.
The humid Miami night air hung heavy over the DEA surveillance center as the digital clock on the wall ticked past 2:47 a.m. Agent Victoria Hayes adjusted her headphone, her eyes focused on the array of monitors displaying waveforms and encrypted communications. After 18 months of tracking the Vasquez cartel, this routine night shift felt like countless others, until the phone rang. The intercepted call crackled through the speakers with unusual clarity. Diego Morales' voice, normally confident and steady, trembled with an anxiety that immediately caught Victoria's attention. She leaned forward, her pulse quickening as she recognized the voice of one of Ramon El Tiburon, Vasquez's most trusted lieutenants. "I can't sleep, man. I keep seeing their faces," Diego's voice whispered into the phone, speaking to someone DEA systems identified as his childhood friend, Carlos Mendoza. The little girl, she couldn't have been more than 8 years old. She was hiding behind her mother when Victoria's hand instinctively reached for the record button, though the system was already capturing everything. In her 5 years with the DEA, she had heard many confessions, but something about Diego's raw vulnerability made her realize this wasn't just another intercepted conversation. This was the break they had been waiting for. "Diego, you need to stop talking about this on the phone," Carlos responded, his voice tense with worry. "You know better than this." But Diego continued, his words pouring out like a dam had burst. "The Herrera family, all of them. El Tiburon said they were stealing from, but I know they weren't. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I pulled the trigger on all of them, even the grandmother." The room suddenly felt colder, despite the tropical heat outside. Victoria's fingers flew across the keyboard, flagging the recording for immediate review and cross-referencing. The Herrera name with unsolved homicides from the past year. The system returned a hit almost instantly. 6 bodies found in a burned-out house in Little Havana, the case that had gone cold after witnesses refused to come forward. Detective Anthony Blackwood arrived at the surveillance center 30 minutes later, his weathered face showing the exhaustion of a man who had spent 2 decades fighting Miami's drug war. At 42, he had seen enough to know that opportunities like this were rare, and even rarer was the chance to finally bring down someone like Ramon Vasquez. "Play it again," Blackwood said, settling into the chair beside Victor. His grey eyes, sharp despite the early hour, studied the audio waveform as if they could reveal secrets beyond the spoken words. As Diego's confession played for the second time, both investigators felt the weight of what they were hearing. This wasn't just evidence of a multiple homicide, it was a window into the soul of a man slowly being consumed by guilt, a weakness that could be exploited to bring down the most powerful criminal organization in South Florida. "He's falling apart," Victoria observed, noting the tremor in Diego's voice. "Guilt is eating him alive. If we move carefully, we might be able to flip him." Blackwood nodded slowly, his mind already calculating the risks. Ramon Vasquez has been untouchable for 15 years. Every witness who ever tried to speak against him either disappeared or changed their story. But this is different. This is one of his own people, and he doesn't know we have it. The recording continued, revealing more details about the Herrera family massacre. Diego described how the order had come directly from Ramon himself, how the family had been targeted not for stealing drugs, but for refusing to allow their small grocery store to be used as a front for money laundering. The killing had been meant to send a message to other business owners in the neighborhood: comply or face the same fate. Victoria's jaw tightened as she listened to the clinical way Diego described binding the family members and executing them one by one. But beneath the horror, she recognized something else, an opportunity. Diego's psychological state, his obvious remorse, and his careless willingness to confess over an unsecured phone line all pointed to a man who might be ready to cooperate with law enforcement. "We need to move. Fast," Blackwood said, standing and pacing the small room. "If Diego is this unstable, it's only a matter of time before someone in the organization notices. And if Ramon suspects we have this recording," he didn't need to finish the sentence. Both investigators knew that Ramon Vasquez's reputation for dealing with threats was legendary in Miami's criminal underworld. Bodies had a way of disappearing when they posed a risk to his empire, and even law enforcement officers weren't immune to his reach. Victoria saved the recording to multiple secure servers and began preparing the preliminary report that would launch the most dangerous investigation of her career. As she typed, she couldn't shake the feeling that this single phone call would either make their careers or end their lives. In the world of Miami's drug cartels, there was rarely any middle ground. The first rays of dawn were beginning to filter through the surveillance center's reinforced windows. Victoria and Anthony prepared to brief their superiors. Neither of them could have predicted that in the coming weeks, this intercepted confession would set in motion a chain of events that would expose corruption at the highest levels of Miami's power structure and reveal that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who pretend to be on your side. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over South Beach as Ramon El Tiburon Vasquez stepped out of his armored Mercedes-Benz, the vehicle's bulletproof glass reflecting the opulent facade of his legitimate business empire. At 45, he moved with the calculated confidence of a man who had transformed himself from a street-level dealer into the undisputed king of Miami's drug trade. His custom-tailored Italian suit, worth more than most people's annual salary, concealed the lean but muscular frame that had earned him his nickname. The shark tattoo on his left forearm, visible only when he rolled up his sleeves, served as a reminder of his predatory nature, a warning that those who knew him understood all too well. The restaurant he entered, Mariscos del Caribe, appeared to be nothing more than an upscale Cuban establishment in the heart of the financial district. But to those in the know, it served as the nerve center of an operation that moved over $50 million in cocaine through Miami's ports each month. The legitimate diners enjoying their arroz con pollo had no idea. They were eating in the headquarters of one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in the United States. Don Ramon greeted the maitre d', an elderly man whose respectful bow masked the fact that he was also the cartel's chief accountant. "Your usual table is ready." Ramon's table, positioned in the back corner with clear sightlines to all entrances, was where he conducted the business of his empire. Within the next hour, he would receive visits from a city councilman discussing zoning permits for a new community center that would actually serve as a drug distribution hub, a federal judge's clerk delivering information about upcoming investigations, and a police captain who had been on the cartel's payroll for over 8 years. Meanwhile, across the city in a nondescript office building, Victoria Hayes and Anthony Blackwood were setting up their own operation. The DEA had provided them with a secure conference room where they could plan their investigation without fear of electronic surveillance. The walls were lined with photographs, maps, and organizational charts that represented years of intelligence gathering on the Vasquez cartel. "Look at this network," Victoria said, pointing to a web of connections that spread across the map like the tentacles of an octopus. "Ramon doesn't just control the drug trade, he's embedded himself into the entire power structure of Miami-Dade County." Anthony studied the chart with the weary eyes of someone who had watched the city's corruption metastasize over 2 decades. 3 judges, 2 prosecutors, half a dozen police commanders, and at least 4 city council members. And those are just the ones we know about. The scope of Ramon's influence was staggering. He owned luxury hotels that laundered money through inflated construction contracts, shipping companies that moved drugs through the port of Miami, and even a chain of daycare centers that provided perfect cover for small-scale distribution operations. His legitimate businesses employed over 3,000 people, making him one of Miami's most prominent entrepreneurs. But it was his reputation for violence that truly protected his empire. The Herrera family massacre was just the latest in a long line of brutal executions designed to maintain fear and silence. Witnesses didn't just refuse to testify against Ramon Vasquez, they disappeared entirely, their bodies never found, their families terrorized into permanent silence. "We need to understand his psychology," Victoria said, studying a surveillance photo of Ramon taken outside his Coral Gables mansion. "Men like him don't just stumble into power, they're strategic, patient, and absolutely ruthless." Ramon's rise to power had been methodical and brutal. Starting as a teenager running drugs for Dominican cartels, he had systematically eliminated his competition while building relationships with corrupt officials who could protect his operation. By the time he was 30, he controlled the entire South Florida pipeline. By 40, he had expanded into legitimate businesses that made him virtually untouchable. The key to his success was his ability to inspire both loyalty and terror in equal measure. His inner circle of lieutenants, including Diego Morales, were bound to him not just by money, but by the knowledge that betrayal meant death not just for them, but for their families as well. This unbreakable code of silence had protected the organization for over a decade. At the restaurant, Ramon's first appointment arrived precisely on time. Councilman Eduardo Ruiz, a thin man with nervous eyes, approached the table with the deference of a vassal greeting his lord. The briefcase he carried contained architectural plans for a proposed community center in Overtown, a neighborhood that had been strategically chosen for its proximity to major highways and its population of residents who wouldn't ask too many questions about unusual nighttime activity. "The permits will be approved next week," Ruiz whispered, sliding the briefcase across the table. "The construction contract has been awarded to your company, as requested." Ramon's smile was as cold as it was brief. "Excellent. And the other matter we discussed? The police presence in the area will be reduced during the evening hours. Captain Morrison has assured me that patrols will be redirected to other neighborhoods." This was how Ramon operated, not through dramatic displays of violence, but through quiet corruption that turned the city's institutions into instruments of his will. Every permit, every contract, every police deployment was carefully orchestrated to serve his interests. As the afternoon wore on, Victoria and Anthony continued their analysis, unaware that their investigation was already being monitored. Isabella Santos, Ramon's attorney and the woman who had helped him navigate the legal complexities of building a criminal empire, had sources throughout law enforcement who kept her informed of any unusual activity. Isabella was more than just Ramon's lawyer. She was his strategic partner, the brilliant legal mind who had helped him construct a network of shell companies and legitimate businesses that made his money impossible to trace. Her office in downtown Miami's legal district was as much a part of the cartel's infrastructure as any drug lab or safe house. When her phone rang with news that the DEA was showing unusual interest in the Vasquez organization, Isabella's response was immediate and decisive. She had spent 10 years protecting Ramon's empire, and she wasn't about to let a routine investigation threaten everything it had built. The sun was setting over Biscayne Bay as both sides of this deadly game prepared for what would come next. Ramon concluded his day of meetings and prepared to return to his fortress-like mansion, confident that his empire was secure. Victoria and Anthony worked late into the night, analyzing the Diego Morales recording and planning their next move. Neither side yet realized that the intercepted confession would soon force them into a confrontation that would test not just their skills, but their very survival. The pre-dawn darkness of Miami's Wynwood district provided perfect cover as Victoria Hayes adjusted her position in the surveillance van parked across from Diego Morales' apartment. Through her high-powered binoculars, she could see the dim glow of a television flickering behind the curtains of the third-floor unit, where Ramon's lieutenant had been holed up for the past 3 days. "Target hasn't left the building since Tuesday," Anthony Blackwood reported through his earpiece from his position in the coffee shop below Diego's apartment. "The building manager says he's been ordering food, delivery multiple times a day. Neighbors report hearing him pacing at all hours." Victoria made a note in her observation log, documenting what was clearly a man on the edge of a psychological breakdown. The Diego Morales she was watching bore little resemblance to the confident enforcer who had once been photographed laughing at Ramon's side during a charity gala. This was a man haunted by his actions, and that made him vulnerable. "We need to understand what triggered his confession," Victoria murmured. "Men like Diego don't just develop a conscience overnight. Something specific broke him." The answer came 3 hours later, when Diego finally emerged from his building, his appearance shocking even to the seasoned investigator. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated to wrinkled clothes, unshaven face, and the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept in days. He moved with the paranoid alertness of prey who knows predators are watching. Following Diego through the winding streets of Little Havana, Victoria and Anthony discovered his destination, a small cemetery where fresh flowers had been placed on 6 graves, marked with the name Herrera. The sight of Diego kneeling before the grave of 8-year-old Sofia Herrera, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs, revealed the source of his psychological torment. "He's been visiting them every day since the confession," Anthony observed, photographing Diego's breakdown from a concealed position. "The guilt is destroying him from the inside." But Diego's emotional state was only part of the equation. As the investigators delved deeper into the Herrera family massacre, they uncovered a web of connections that extended far beyond a simple drug dispute. The family's small grocery store had been strategically located on a corner that served as a crucial link in the cartel's distribution network. When Miguel Herrera refused to allow his store to be used for money laundering, he had unknowingly signed his family's death warrant. The crime scene photos were devastating. The entire family, Miguel, his wife Carmen, their children Sofia and Roberto, Carmen's mother Elena, and Miguel's brother Luis, had been found in their home, each killed with a single gunshot to the head. The clinical precision of the execution bore Diego's signature style, but the overkill suggested something more personal than a routine cartel hit. This wasn't just business, Victoria realized, studying the forensic reports. Diego knew this family. Look at the pattern of the wounds, the positioning of the bodies. He was trying to make it quick, merciful. That's why he's falling apart. The investigation took a dangerous turn when they discovered that Diego wasn't the only one suffering from psychological pressure. Intelligence reports indicated that Tommy Reza Castellanos, the leader of a rival Dominican cartel, had been making moves to exploit what he perceived as weakness in Ramon's organization. Recent intercepted communications suggested that Tommy was planning a major offensive against Ramon's territory, potentially triggering a war that would turn Miami's streets into a battlefield. If Tommy moves against Ramon while we're trying to flip Diego, we could lose our only witness, Anthony warned during their evening briefing. Cartel wars don't leave room for witnesses or cooperation deals. The tension escalated when their surveillance revealed that Diego had begun making additional phone calls to unknown numbers, each conversation brief and cryptic. The DEA's technical team was working to identify the recipients, but the sophisticated encryption suggested Diego was either seeking help or preparing to run. Victoria's concern deepened when she noticed a pattern in Diego's movement. He was conducting counter-surveillance, using techniques that suggested either training or paranoia. He would double back on his routes, use reflective surfaces to check for followers, and vary his timing in ways that made him difficult to track. He knows something, Victoria concluded. Either he's figured out we're watching him, or someone has warned him. The breakthrough came when they finally intercepted one of Diego's encrypted calls. The voice on the other end belonged to Father Miguel Santana, the priest of the Catholic Church where the Herrera family had worship. Diego wasn't planning to run. He was planning to confess, not to law enforcement, but to God. I can't carry this anymore, Padre. Diego's voice cracked through the surveillance equipment. I need to tell someone about what I've done. All of it. This revelation presented both an opportunity and a crisis. If Diego confessed to the priest, the seal of confession would protect him from having to testify, but it might also provide the investigators with crucial details about other crimes. However, approaching a priest to break the seal of confession was legally and ethically problematic. We need to get to him before he reaches that confessional, Anthony decided. Once he talks to the priest, we lose any chance of using his guilt to our advantage. As they prepared to make their move, neither Victoria nor Anthony realized they were walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. Isabella Santos had been tracking their investigation from the beginning, using her network of contacts within law enforcement to monitor their every move. She knew about the intercepted confession, the surveillance operation, and most importantly, she knew that Diego was about to become a liability that needed to be eliminated. The game was becoming more complex by the hour. While Victoria and Anthony focused on Diego's psychological state, Isabella was 3 steps ahead, preparing to remove the threat before it could damage Ramon's empire. And Diego, caught between his guilt and his fear, was about to discover that some confessions carry a price far higher than absolution. In the shadows of Miami's criminal underworld, 3 separate forces were converging on a single point: a broken man whose conscience had made him the most dangerous person in the city. The question was no longer whether Diego would confess, it was whether he would survive long enough to do so. Isabella Santos stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, her 42nd floor office, watching the sun cast long shadows across Biscayne Bay. Her reflection in the glass revealed a woman who had mastered the art of appearing unthreatening while wielding considerable power. At 38, she had built a reputation as one of Miami's most formidable defense attorneys, but her true expertise lay in the shadow where law and criminality intersected. The encrypted phone on her mahogany desk buzzed with an incoming message from Detective Captain Luis Morrison, one of several law enforcement officials whose loyalty she had purchased with carefully deposited payments into offshore accounts. The message was brief but alarming. DEA surveillance unit established. Target DM. Recommend immediate action. Isabella's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the glass as she processed this information. Diego Morales had always been one of Ramon's most reliable lieutenants, but lately his behavior had become erratic. The psychological evaluation she had secretly commissioned through a corrupt police psychologist confirmed her worst fears. Diego was suffering from severe PTSD and was at high risk of cooperating with law enforcement. "We have a problem," she said into her secure phone as Ramon's voice answered on the first ring. "Our friend with the guilty conscience has attracted some unwanted attention." 20 minutes later, Ramon arrived at her office through the private elevator that connected to the building's underground parking. His presence filled the room with an intensity that made even Isabella's seasoned security team nervous. When Ramon Vasquez was concerned, everyone around him felt the weight of impending violence. "How long have they been watching him?" Ramon asked, his voice carrying the controlled fury that his enemies had learned to fear. "3 days that we know of, but given the level of resources they're deploying, this isn't a routine surveillance operation. They have something specific on him." Isabella pulled up a detailed report on her computer screen, showing the movement patterns of the DEA surveillance team. Her sources within the federal courthouse had also provided copies of sealed warrant applications that revealed the scope of the investigation. "They intercepted something," she continued, her analytical mind working through the possibility. "Phone calls, meetings, something that gave them probable cause for extended surveillance. And if they're this focused on Diego..." "He talked," Ramon finished, his fists clenching involuntarily. After 15 years of loyalty, that weak fool opened his mouth. Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria Hayes was conducting her own psychological analysis of their target. She had requested Diego's complete file from every law enforcement database in South Florida, building a comprehensive profile of a man who had transformed from a promising college student into one of Miami's most feared killers. Diego Morales graduated magna cum laude from University of Miami with a degree in business administration, Victoria read from her laptop screen. No criminal record until age 22, when he was arrested for assault during a bar fight. Charges were dropped when the victim refused to testify. Anthony Blackwood studied the progression of Diego's criminal career with the insight of someone who had seen countless young men follow similar paths. Classic recruitment pattern. Ramon probably spotted him during that first arrest, saw potential in someone with intelligence and desperation. The transformation had been gradual but complete. Diego's university record showed a young man struggling to pay for his education. After his father died in a construction accident, the insurance settlement had been inadequate, leaving Diego's family facing foreclosure on their modest home in Hialeah. Ramon's organization had offered him work that paid more in a month than most college graduates earned in a year. "He started as a bookkeeper," Victoria continued, tracing Diego's rise through the cartel hierarchy, managing legitimate businesses, handling money transfer, clean work that let him maintain the illusion that he wasn't really a criminal. But Ramon's organization didn't allow anyone to remain innocent. By age 25, Diego was managing drug shipments. By 30, he was eliminating threats to the organization's operations. The Herrera family massacre represented the culmination of a decade-long descent into violence that had finally broken something essential inside him. The psychological pressure on Diego intensified when Anthony began a carefully orchestrated campaign of indirect contact. Rather than approaching Diego directly, which would have triggered immediate suspicion, Anthony used techniques designed to increase Diego's paranoia and guilt. Anonymous tips were called in about suspicious activity at locations Diego had visited, forcing him to watch police cars patrol areas where he was conducting business. Flowers appeared on the Herrera family graves with cards signed "A Friend," messages that could have come from anyone, but which Diego would inevitably interpret as signs that someone knew about his involvement in the murders. "We're not trying to catch him," Anthony explained to Victoria during one of their strategy sessions. "We're trying to break him down psychologically until he sees cooperation as his only way out." The strategy was working. Diego's behavior became increasingly erratic as he began seeing threats everywhere. He changed his routine daily, varied his routes, and started carrying multiple weapons, despite Ramon's strict orders about avoiding unnecessary attention from law enforcement. Isabella Santos recognized the signs of a man under psychological attack, and she responded with the cold calculation that had made her indispensable to Ramon's organization. She began her own counter-surveillance operation, using private investigators and corrupt law enforcement contacts to identify the DEA agents who were targeting Diego. Victoria Hayes, Isabella read from a detailed dossier her team had compiled. 5 years with the DEA, specializes in long-term infiltration operations. Her last case resulted in the dismantling of a Haitian drug network in Fort Lauderdale. Isabella's research revealed something that could be exploited. Victoria's younger brother had been killed in a drug-related shooting 3 years earlier, the murder that had motivated her to join the DEA. This personal connection to the war on drugs made Victoria particularly dangerous because she couldn't be bought or intimidated, but it also made her predictable. Anthony Blackwood is more interesting, Isabella continued, studying the veteran detective's file. 20 years on, the force, divorced, 2 children he rarely sees. financial problems from gambling debts and alimony payments. He might be more flexible in his loyalties. Ramon's response was characteristically direct. Kill them both. That would create more problems than it solves, Isabella replied calmly. Dead federal agents bring too much attention, but there are other ways to neutralize threats. As the day progressed, both sides continued their deadly dance of surveillance and counter-surveillance. Diego, unaware that he was the focal point of a battle between two powerful forces, continued his psychological deterioration. His visits to the Herrera family graves became daily pilgrimages of guilt and remorse, each one monitored by DEA surveillance team and Isabella's private operative. The tension reached a breaking point when Diego finally made the decision that would determine his fate. Standing before Sofia Herrera's grave, he pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number he had memorized but never called, the DEA's anonymous tip line. But before he could speak, a black sedan pulled up to the cemetery entrance, and Diego recognized the driver as one of Isabella's security operatives. The message was clear. He was being watched, and any attempt to contact law enforcement would have immediate and fatal consequences. Diego ended the call without speaking and walked away from the cemetery, knowing that his window for redemption was rapidly closing. The game of psychological warfare had escalated to the point where someone would have to make a decisive move soon, and in Ramon Vasquez's world, decisive moves usually involved violence. The abandoned warehouse in Miami's industrial district stood like a monument to the city's forgotten past, its rusted exterior hiding the sophisticated surveillance equipment that Victoria Hayes and Anthony Blackwood had spent the previous night installing. This was to be the location of their most ambitious operation yet, a carefully orchestrated sting designed to catch Diego Morales in the act of confessing to federal agents. Audio check. Victoria whispered into her concealed microphone, her voice barely audible over the sound of morning traffic filtering through the warehouse's broken. All surveillance positions report ready. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Using information gathered from their psychological profile of Diego, they had created a scenario designed to trigger his overwhelming need to confess. A fake witness, played by an undercover DEA agent, would approach Diego claiming to have seen him at the Herrera house on the night of the murders. Faced with the possibility of exposure, Diego would either flee, confirming his guilt, or attempt to silence the witness, giving them grounds for arrest. Remember, we need him to confess on tape, Anthony reminded the team through their encrypted communication system. Without his own words admitting to the murders, we don't have enough to make the charges stick against Ramon. But as the sun climbed higher over Miami's skyline, it became clear that something was wrong. Diego, who had maintained a rigid routine for the past week, failed to appear at any of his usual locations. His apartment showed no signs of recent occupancy, and his car hadn't been seen since the previous evening. "He's gone," Victoria announced grimly, reviewing the overnight surveillance reports. Sometime between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., Diego Morales vanished completely. The implications were staggering. If Diego had fled voluntarily, it meant he had somehow discovered their surveillance operation. If he had been taken against his will, it suggested that Ramon's organization had identified him as a threat and eliminated. Either scenario represented a catastrophic failure of their investigation. Anthony's 20 years of experience told him we're dealing with the latter possibility. Men like Diego don't just disappear on their own. They have too much to lose, too many connections to abandon. Someone took him. The search for Diego consumed the next 48 hours, as every resource available to the DEA was deployed across Miami-Dade County. Traffic cameras were reviewed, cell phone records analyzed, and informants questioned. The trail led to a disturbing discovery. Diego's phone had last pinged a cell tower near the port of Miami at 2:17 a.m., in an area known for its isolated warehouses and deep water access. Victoria's worst fears were confirmed when maritime patrol units discovered Diego's car submerged in a shipping channel, its windows rolled down and interior stripped of any evidence. The message was clear. Diego Morales would never testify against anyone. They knew, Victoria said, staring at crime scene photographs that showed no signs of struggle, no evidence of violence, just the cold efficiency of professional elimination. Somehow, they knew exactly what we were planning. The realization that their investigation had been compromised sent shockwaves through the DEA task force. Every member of the team was subjected to polygraph examinations, their financial records scrutinized, their personal communications monitored. But the leak wasn't coming from within the federal agents. It was coming from someone with access to local law enforcement communication. Isabella Santos had orchestrated Diego's disappearance with the same meticulous planning she brought to her legal practice. Using Captain Morrison's access to police surveillance system, she had tracked the DEA's movements for weeks, identifying their operational patterns and predicting their next moves with remarkable accuracy. The warehouse operation was amateur, she told Ramon during their emergency meeting at a safe house in Coral Gables. They assumed we wouldn't anticipate their psychological manipulation tactic. Diego was eliminated before he could compromise our organization, but Ramon's satisfaction with Isabella's efficiency was tempered by a growing concern about the federal investigation. Diego's elimination had bought them time, but it had also confirmed to the DEA that they were dealing with a sophisticated criminal organization capable of identifying and neutralizing threats with remarkable speed. They'll be more careful now, Ramon observed, his strategic mind already working through the implications, and they'll be looking for their leak. Isabella's expression remained impassive as she considered the next phase of their defensive strategy. Let them look. Captain Morrison has been feeding us information for 8 years without detection. His position is secure. Meanwhile, Victoria and Anthony were conducting their own analysis of the security breach. The precision with which Diego had been eliminated suggested intimate knowledge of federal surveillance technique, the kind of expertise that came from years of law enforcement experience. Whoever is feeding them information knows our procedures, Victoria concluded, reviewing the timeline of Diego's disappearance. They knew about the warehouse operation before we implemented. Anthony's investigation led him to a disturbing realization. The leak wasn't just providing information about current operations, it was providing advance warning about planned activities. Someone with access to their confidential briefings was systematically compromising their investigation. The breakthrough came when FBI counterintelligence specialists discovered anomalous access patterns in the Miami-Dade Police Department's computer system. Captain Morrison's login credentials had been used to access DEA files during hours when he was supposedly off-duty, and from IP addresses that didn't match his known locations. "We've got him," Anthony announced during an emergency briefing. Captain Luis Morrison has been accessing federal databases and forwarding classified information to unknown recipients for at least 6 months. But when they moved to arrest Morrison, they discovered that he too had vanished, his house abandoned, and his financial accounts emptied. Isabella Santos had anticipated the possibility of exposure and had extracted her valuable asset before he could be captured and interrogated. The elimination of both Diego and Morrison left Victoria and Anthony facing a sobering reality. They were fighting an organization that was always one step ahead, with resources and intelligence capabilities that rivaled their own. Ramon Vasquez's empire wasn't just protected by violence and corruption, it was defended by a sophisticated network of legal and operational expertise that made it nearly impregnable. "We're not just hunting a drug dealer," Victoria realized as she studied the organizational chart that Isabella had helped construct. "We're fighting a shadow government with its own intelligence service, its own enforcement arm, and its own legal department." The war between federal law enforcement and Ramon's organization had escalated beyond a simple criminal investigation. It had become a battle between two competing systems of power, each with its own rules, its own loyalties, and its own willingness to use violence to achieve its objective. As night fell over Miami, both sides prepared for the next phase of their conflict, knowing that the stakes had risen beyond the fate of any individual criminal or law enforcement officer. The very nature of justice in South Florida hung in the balance. The thunderstorm that rolled across Miami on that fateful Thursday evening seemed to mirror the violent confrontation that was about to unfold in the city's criminal underworld. Lightning illuminated the glass towers of downtown as Victoria Hayes sat in her hotel room, staring at evidence that would change everything she thought she knew about their investigation. The revelation had come through an encrypted message from an anonymous source, a single photograph that showed Isabella Santos entering Ramon Vasquez's private residence through a side entrance, taken at 3 a.m., just hours after Diego Morales had disappeared. But this wasn't the image of a lawyer visiting a client. Isabella was using her own key, moving with the familiarity of someone who belonged there. "She's not just his attorney," Victoria whispered into her secure phone as Anthony arrived at her hotel. "Isabella Santos is his partner. She's been orchestrating everything from the beginning." Anthony studied the photograph intensity of a man who had spent his career learning to read the subtleties of human behavior. The body language, the casual intimacy, the complete absence of security protocols that would normally surround meeting between Ramon and any outsider, it all pointed to a relationship that went far beyond legal representation. Think about it, Victoria continued, her mind racing through the implications. Every move we've made, every strategy we've developed, she's been 3 steps ahead because she's not just defending against our investigation, she's been directing their counter-operations. The scope of Isabella's deception became clear as they reviewed the timeline of events. She had used her position as a respected member of Miami's legal community to build a network of contacts within law enforcement, the judiciary, and the federal agencies. Captain Morrison hadn't been corrupted by Ramon's money. He had been recruited by Isabella's sophisticated intelligence operation. She's the real power behind the throne, Anthony realized. Ramon may be the face of the organization, but Isabella is the brain. Their analysis was interrupted by a call from the DEA's Technical Surveillance Unit. The team had been monitoring communications from Ramon's known associates and had intercepted something extraordinary, a conversation between Isabella and Ramon that revealed the true nature of their relationship and their plans for eliminating the federal investigation. "Play it," Victoria, her pulse quickening as she recognized the voices. "The DEA agents are getting too close." Isabella's voice came through the speakers with clinical detachment. "Hayes and Blackwood need to be eliminated before they connect us to Morrison's disappearance." Ramon's response carried the casual tone of a man discussing the weather. "Arrange it. Make it look like a cartel hit from Tommy's organization. The feds will waste months chasing the wrong targets." But the most shocking revelation came in Isabella's next words. "I've already taken care of Diego personally. He was becoming too unstable, and I couldn't risk him eventually." Talking, the psychological pressure they were applying would have broken him eventually. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what they were hearing. Isabella Santos hadn't just ordered Diego's elimination, she had carried it out herself. The sophisticated legal mind they had been investigating was also a cold-blooded killer. "She murdered him," Anthony said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A sitting attorney executed a man to protect a criminal organization." The recording continued, revealing details that would have been impossible to obtain through conventional investigation. Isabella described how she had manipulated Diego's psychological state, using her knowledge of criminal psychology to drive him to the breaking point where he would become a liability. She had then arranged his elimination with the same methodical planning she brought to her legal cases. "We have her," Victoria announced. But even as she spoke, she realized they faced a nearly impossible challenge. Isabella Santos was a respected member of the legal community with no criminal record and powerful connections throughout Miami's power structure. Convincing anyone that she was actually a killer would require evidence beyond a single intercepted conversation. The trap they set for Isabella was as sophisticated as anything she had orchestrated against them, using the same psychological manipulation techniques that Isabella had employed against Diego. Victoria and Anthony created a scenario designed to force her into revealing her true nature. They leaked false information through channels they knew Isabella was monitoring, suggesting that Diego had left behind a written confession hidden in a safety deposit. The confession allegedly detailed not just the Herrera family murders, but Isabella's role in planning and covering up dozens of other crimes. Isabella's response was swift and decisive. Rather than using intermediaries or hired killers, she decided to retrieve the non-existent confession herself. Her legal training had taught her that physical evidence was more dangerous than witness testimony, and she couldn't risk allowing anyone else to handle something so sensitive. The safety deposit box was located in a downtown bank that the DEA had for undercover operations. Every surface had been equipped with surveillance equipment, every angle covered by hidden cameras. When Isabella arrived to access the box she believed contained Diego's confession, she walked directly into the most comprehensive surveillance trap in DEA history. But Isabella Santos hadn't survived in Ramon's world by being careless. She arrived at the bank armed and prepared for violence, her legal briefcase concealing a sophisticated weapons system that she had used to eliminate threats to the organization. When she discovered that the safety deposit box was empty, her training as both a lawyer and a killer took over. "You thought you could manipulate me the same way I manipulated Diego," Isabella said as she turned to face the surveillance cameras she had detected. "But I'm not a guilt-ridden killer having a psychological breakdown. I'm a professional." The confrontation that followed revealed the true extent of Isabella's capability. She wasn't just an attorney who had been corrupted by criminal money. she was a trained operative who had spent years building the perfect cover identity. Her law degree was real, her legal skills genuine, but her true expertise lay in intelligence operations and targeted elimination. Victoria and Anthony, monitoring from a secure location, watched in fascination and horror as Isabella methodically located and destroyed their surveillance equipment while simultaneously calling Ramon to report that their investigation had been compromised. "It's over," Isabella announced into her phone. "They know about our relationship, and they have recordings. We need to implement the evacuation protocols immediately." But Isabella had made one critical error in her assessment of federal law enforcement capabilities. The surveillance operation at the bank was a decoy, designed to make her believe she had discovered and neutralized their real evidence-gathering effort. The actual surveillance had been conducted from satellite feeds and remote sensors that she hadn't detected. Every word of her phone conversation with Ramon, every detail of her weapons demonstration, every moment of her careful destruction of the decoy surveillance equipment had been recorded in high definition from sources she didn't know existed. "Isabella Santos," Victoria's voice echoed through the bank's sound system as federal agents surrounded the building. "You are under arrest for the murder of Diego Morales, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise." The final confrontation between Isabella and federal law enforcement lasted less than 10 minutes, but it revealed the true scope of the criminal organization they had been fighting. Isabella's briefcase contained not just weapons, but detailed files on every corrupt official in Miami-Dade County, financial records of the cartel's legitimate business operations, and contingency plans for eliminating federal judges if the legal system turned against them. Ramon Vasquez was arrested simultaneously at his restaurant, surrounded by federal agents who had finally accumulated enough evidence to penetrate his network of corruption and intimidation. The empire he had spent 15 years building crumbled in a single coordinated operation that rolled up over 200 suspects across South Florida. But even in defeat, Isabella Santos provided one final twist that left Victoria and Anthony questioning everything they thought they understood about justice and corruption in Miami. As she was being led away in handcuffs, Isabella turned to Victoria with a smile that was both triumphant and terrifying. "You think you've won," Isabella said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who knew secret that would never be. "But you have no idea how deep this goes. Ramon and I were just one operation in a network that spans from Colombia to Canada. You've cut off one head of a hydra that has dozens more." As the thunderstorm passed over Miami and dawn broke over a city forever changed by the night's events, Victoria realized that their victory was both complete and incomplete. They had destroyed Ramon's organization and brought Isabella Santos to justice, but in doing so, they had revealed the existence of a criminal network far more sophisticated and dangerous than anything they had imagined. The war against Miami's criminal underworld had ended with a decisive victory for federal law enforcement, but in the shadows of that victory lay the disturbing knowledge that somewhere in the city, new players were already moving to fill the vacuum left by Ramon's fall, and some of them might be even more dangerous than the enemies they had just defeated.